Okay, everyone, we're going to go ahead and get started. I've got 5 past the hour. Hopefully a few more people jump in here as we are going through this. First, thank you all for joining me today. I know that at least where I'm at in the Dallas area, it is absolutely gorgeous outside. The sun is shining. It has some thunderstorms move through last night, so I imagine some people got busy, probably had to do some limb cleanup and things like that. It's also spring, and so it is the busy season. My phone has been ringing off the hook, which is a good thing, and I hope your phones have been ringing too. So first, thank you for being here. That means you're really interested in what I'm talking about, or you just really need a CEU. So either way, I appreciate you. So today's topic, preventative plant health care, a sustainable approach to tree preservation. Sure, clicked in here. All right. A little bit about myself. I am the South Central Technical Manager for Arborists. I live in the Dallas, Texas area. I cover Texas, Oklahoma, New Mexico, Arkansas, Kansas, and Missouri. I've been with Arborists for 7 years. Prior to that, I was the plant healthcare manager for a Dallas area tree care company, where I did plant healthcare services. I also sold tree work, ground stumps, dragged brush, was a mechanic, you name it, I did it, which is kind of the norm when you're working for a tree care company. You've got to do a little bit of everything. And that's what helps make you a good, well-rounded arborist, which I became a certified arborist in 2011, and then a board certified master arborist at the end of 2017. And so my wife says that I'm just a big tree nerd, and I tend to agree with her. I love the arboriculture industry. I love the people that are in this industry, and I'm really excited that things are going to be getting back to normal in 2021. The Texas Tree Conference is back again in Waco, Texas. It's a fantastic event, and I'm looking forward to that this fall. I went to school at Texas Tech. I have a bachelor's degree in agronomy and a master's degree in crop science, and so my education is really geared towards plant and soil science, row cropping, growing things, pesticides, fertilizers. And so kind of taking my educational background and applying it to arboriculture, I found a really good mesh, and I have a lot of fun working with people throughout my territory to learn about plant health care. Okay, somebody says my mic is going in and out, so I'm going to try to hold this right in front of my face, and that way you guys can hear me. Thank you for letting me know. So anyways, if you guys have a question that comes up during the presentation, go ahead and put it in the chat. I may not get to them until the end. But yeah, feel free to ask away, even if it's something not totally related to what I'm talking about. Let's go ahead and throw it out there, and then we can have a good discussion at the end of the presentation. Just something real quick. That big tree that I'm standing in front of, just please ignore the Widowmaker. That's right above my head. But that's my favorite tree in the whole world. That's on my family's farm. When I was a kid, my brother and I used to climb around up in that tree. And that left side, there's a big beehive up in that leader. So we didn't climb on that side, but we did have a fort built in the other side of the tree. So just one of my favorite trees. And I'm sure each one of you that's on today, you probably have, if you think about it, like, what's my favorite tree? I bet you could pick one out, and it's probably something sentimental like that. And so it just goes to show that people do get emotionally attached to trees. There's something that, it's on a property like this, or, planted in memory of somebody or something like that. And so just something, a little exercise. I like to plant a seed in your head. Okay, Kara, does it sound bad? Is my mic no good?
It's not too bad, but sometimes you'll go like soft, and then it's kind of like, so you might want to try to call in. That might be better if you could do that quickly. If people,
technical difficulties.
Yeah, we appreciate your patience, everyone, but this will, I think, make the sound better.
Oh, hang on. How about now? Is that better?
Yes, that's better.
Yeah. Okay. It was trying to use the mic on my camera instead of the mic that's right in front of my mouth. All right. Hopefully no more problems with that. I've only done this like 15 times before. You'd think I'd get to know. All right. So guys, in the email that was sent out, we said, you know, IPM, and I sent out kind of a teaser email as well. You know, what is integrated pest management, or IPM? For those of you that have gone to all sorts of tree conferences or workshops and things like that, or talked to anybody, this term IPM, I feel like it gets thrown out a lot. You know, use this in your IPM program. And it's like, okay, what does that actually mean? And so I looked it up because I've probably thrown that term out there. So I broke this definition in half. IPM is a sustainable, just right there, unpack that word, sustainable. What does that mean to you? It is a sustainable, science-based decision-making process. Okay, so integrative pest management is actually a decision-making process, and it combines biological, cultural, physical, and chemical tools. To identify, manage, and reduce risk from pests and pest management tools and strategies in a way that minimizes overall economic, health, and environmental risks. Wow, that is the definition of integrative pest management. That's a lot to digest right there. And so just to break it up, IPM is a sustainable, science-based decision-making process that utilizes all sorts of options to reduce risk of pests and pest management tools. So it says reduce risk twice. And what I have underlined there, minimize overall economic, health, and environmental risks. So basically, integrated pest management, you are trying to reduce the risk from the pest and the pest management tools. And the other thing that should be added in here about reducing risk, you want to reduce risk to the pesticide applicator company and the applicator. So this is what the IPM cycle looks like. And I'm sure a lot of you have probably seen this before. And so there's a lot going on with integrated pest management. The first step, if you look at kind of the top left quadrant of that circle, it says evaluation. That's where it starts. So you start with evaluation, you look at the pest ID, prevention, monitoring, choose an option, take action, evaluation. It's just a big cycle, okay? But there's a lot more in IPM than just the action. And that's usually what people are focused on. Like, what am I going to do to treat this? What's the action? And all this other stuff kind of falls to the wayside. Prevention is what we were talking about today. The title of today's talk is Preventative Plant Healthcare. All right, so let's look inside of our plant healthcare toolbox. So a lot of times PHC, we're talking about insect and disease control options. And when you start looking at, well, what can I use? You've got lots of different tools in your toolbox. You can do foliar sprays. That's really where like plant healthcare started, way back in the early days, foliar spraying. And then with the advent of systemic insecticides and systemic disease control products, you got the bark sprays, soil drenches, tree injections, beneficial insects. Put a question mark on there. Beneficials is not something that can be used on every single property, but maybe if you're managing like a large property, I know I've done some work with the Dallas Arboretum in the past, and they like to utilize beneficial insects, but that's because when they release them, they have a large property and those insects can actually do some good for them. But in your typical suburb backyard, if you release a bunch of ladybugs, they're all going to leave. So not always going to be an option for you. Plant growth regulators. That is a great tool in your plant healthcare toolbox. Probably one of the most underutilized tools, in my opinion, but can do a lot of good. And we're going to talk about it as we go through this today. And then lastly, this is probably the largest category of plant healthcare. It's your soil manipulation. So using the air spade or air knife, introduction of carbon sources. That's really kind of been a buzzword lately, carbon sources. You got humic acid, molasses, biochar is the big one right now. And then deep root feeding. That is probably the #1 plant healthcare service that's offered throughout the United States, is a deep root feed. You can put in NPK sources. You can use mycorrhizal products, beneficial bacteria, seaweed extracts. And then there's even moisture controlling technologies, like the product that we offer, Hydrotane, that utilizes hydroscopic humectants. So there's a lot of stuff you can do to the soil. So these are what came to mind when I was thinking of what is in the plant healthcare toolbox. Just real quick on paclobutrazol. There's the reason I think it's one of the most underutilized products in that plant healthcare toolbox is because people hear growth regulator, but they maybe don't understand everything that it does, the physiological changes that happen to a tree that's been treated with paclobutrazol. You get a lot of secondary or maybe side effects from that growth inhibition. You see an increase of root hairs, thicker leaf cuticles, more leaf hairs, increased chlorophyll production, smaller stomates, smaller leaves, and additional carbohydrate storage. So a lot of really important physiological changes happen after that application is made. And what's really cool to think about with paclobutrazol is when we look at these different services, so like soil manipulation, you are changing the environment that tree is in, right? The soil that is growing in, you're making some changes there. You're adding some things to the soil to ultimately benefit the tree. Or with the insect and disease control options, you're doing things to control outside factors like the insects and disease that might be getting on that tree. But with paclobutrazol, you're making these physiological changes happen inside the tree. It changes how the tree is functioning on a physiological level. There's nothing else that you can do in that plant healthcare toolbox that even comes close to what paclobutrazol does. All right, so back to the definition of IPM. And I think this child hugging the tree, us as tree people, this is like when you think of integrative pest management, this needs to be like what you're thinking of. Because this is how people think. I have sprayed hundreds or thousands of trees. I've done all sorts of things out there in the field, and people would always ask, well, when is it going to be okay for my kids to play in the backyard? Or when is it going to be okay for my dog to go back there? And so this is really how our society is changing. People are becoming more and more adverse to pesticide usage, and they want to be able to go and hug their trees, basically. So when we think about our plant healthcare toolbox, which of those options minimizes the overall economic, health, and environmental risks? So we look at the I&D options, foliar sprays. When you think about IPM, that really is like the opposite. When you're trying to minimize the risk to the environment, the health, and then like I said, I should have added to that definition the risk that the applicator and the applicator company is encountering. Foliar sprays are kind of going the way of the dinosaur because of that risk. You know, I used to do these services. There's always that nosy neighbor that's like looking through the blinds at you, wondering what's going on. And so spraying pesticides has really, especially in the tree care world where drift is a major concern, fewer and fewer sprays are happening. Now, not to say it's completely eliminated, there are some reduced risk pesticides that can be used. Spinosad is one that comes to mind by the trade name Conserve. That's a good product that can be used that's kind of in that reduced risk category. But the days of spraying permethrin everywhere or diazinon and things like that,
Those days have gone. Soil drench, kind of the same thing. You've got to think about everything else that's impacted. So your soil drench products, those really came about with the neonicotinoids, imidacloprid and dinotepfurin. Well, now that same classification of insecticides, which are really great tools and were introduced to the market as kind of the reduced risk pesticides, they're now under a lot of pressure due to bees and the concerns with those products getting up into the pollen of the trees and things that are treated. So here in the Dallas area, we have problems with crepe myrtle bark scale. The neonics work fantastic on that pest. Like, in fact, you go and listen to talks about it, they're going to tell you, yeah, dinotepfurin and imidacloprid smokes this insect. The problem is the crepe myrtles are flowering pretty much throughout the summer. They start flowering in June and they're going to flower through August. And so they are often foraged by bees. So that doesn't really fit the IPM definition to use those things. Bark sprays, that is in terms compared to a foliar spray, a lot less drift concern there, but still you're spraying a high concentration of insecticide on the outside of that tree trunk. So you wouldn't want to tell your homeowner that their kid can go hug the tree like our picture here. And there is a little bit of drift. You're spraying a very high concentrated solution onto the outside of that tree. So what does splash off, it can affect other insects in the vicinity. Tree injection has really come on a lot in the past 10 years. I've been with Arborjet for 7 years, and I've even noticed a difference with how people are really beginning to embrace tree injection. And I'd like to think it has something to do with me doing a good job about educating people on this, but I think it really has more to do with trying to reduce risk to the company and be smarter about the way that you're using insecticides. Rather than blasting gallons and gallons of solution out, we're able to use milliliters of dosage to treat large trees. And it's just a reduced risk application. Everything gets sealed inside the tree. We're not spraying stuff into the environment. And then again, with beneficials, great if they can be used. However, in residential tree care, it's not always the case. Plant growth regulators, paclobutrazol. I'd say you still, this is a drench product. And so you need to be aware of the type of soil and what might be below ground when you're using these things. Some areas have very rocky soils. Maybe they're in a recharge zone for an aquifer or close to a stream or something like that. And you just want to be aware of that. Paclobutrazol is formulated in a way where it's not going to have a lot of risk of running off or leaching through the soil profile. It's actually bound to a clay carrier. That's why that stuff looks kind of like a milkshake inside the jug. So it doesn't really leach through the ground too far. It stays pretty close to where you put it. And then when you look at the soil manipulation, a lot of these are going to be right in line with that IPM definition of reducing health and environmental risks, especially, decompacting the soil using the air knife or implementing carbon sources. But when you get to that deep root feed, that's where you may want to say, okay, what are these nutrients made of that I'm putting into the ground? And is this really benefiting the tree, and how? I used to deep root feed trees. I did that for 4 years, probably thousands and thousands of trees I did in that time frame. And I remember one day as I was fertilizing this tree that was probably about as large as that one I showed on my first slide, my favorite tree. And I was pumping a high nitrogen fertilizer on it. And I'm sitting there thinking, why am I doing this? Why does this 200 to 300-year-old live oak need this fertilizer? And I honestly couldn't answer that question. I was like, it did not get to be this old by needing somebody to put fertilizer on it. So ask that question, how is this benefiting the tree? Because what a high NPK fertilizer does is it encourages growth. That is the role of nitrogen for that tree. It makes that tree grow. faster. And when these trees get to be mature, that's kind of counterintuitive. That's not what they're trying to do anymore. They're just trying to hold on. But the other things, mycorrhizal, beneficial bacteria, seaweed extract, things like that, definitely going to fall in line with that IPM definition. Okay, so just to get a full understanding of this, let's look at the IPM approach for emerald ash borer. So we're a sustainable, science-based decision-making process that combines biological, cultural, physical, and chemical tools to identify, manage, and reduce risk from pesticides and pest management tools and strategies in a way that minimizes overall economic health and environmental risks. That is a long definition. All right, so we're gonna start at evaluation. Again, this is for EAB. Is it an ash tree? Yes. Has emerald ash borer been found within 15 miles? Yes. Are there any preventative measures that could be taken here? And so prevention, you know, the USDA, they've been releasing predatory wasps. So that kind of falls into the beneficial insect category of management. However, the wasps are never going to eradicate emerald ash borer because the wasp depends on the ash borer to survive. And so they're kind of going to be in an equilibrium. There's always going to be some EAB, and those wasps will never take that pest down to zero. The other thing to consider with prevention is kind of goes into the cultural practices. All right, this is an ash tree. EAB is within 15 miles. What is the condition of our tree right now? Is this a desirable tree to keep, or is removal the best option? And that would be the preventative measure. Monitoring really is just knowing when do the adults emerge, typically in early summer. And then your options for treatment: injection, soil drench, or bark spray. And which of those definitions or which of those treatments fits into the definition of integrative pest management. Choose your control option to make the application. So with that, tree injection, as we talked about, limits environmental exposure. Imamectin benzoate, or triage, is the most effective against that pest and the longest lasting, which makes it the most economical. And it's also not found in the pollen. And so when you look at it from an IPM perspective, the soil drench and bark spray really don't even, they don't even get off the ground. When you talk about minimizing the economic, health, and environmental risks. For those of you that are on here, you probably have seen or heard about our new product, Triage R10. It's basically a higher concentration of imamectin benzoate. It's a 9.7% active compared to a 4%. So this means you're using a much lower dose of chemistry per tree. It makes your applications really, really efficient. I'm about to show you guys a quick video here of Corey, our rep in Colorado. He's actually injecting a pine tree, which have been notoriously painfully slow to inject. And so this will control, in his area, he's treating for pine bark beetles. The other cool thing about R10 is it may be mixed with our fungicide Propazole. And so you can get a kind of 2-for-1 application for pests like mountain pine beetle that have a virulent strain of blue stain, or on pine wilt disease. Also, blue stain is a facet of that. So mixing those together is a really nice option. So it just speeds up those applications, making you very efficient and able to get the job done quickly. All right, so that was a little bit about IPM, guys. I hope kind of breaking down that definition and kind of kind of helps you understand what that actually means in the decision-making process that you need to go through when you start treating trees. When you're looking at it, you're wanting to see the big picture and how your application can affect things. To get on to the second half of the presentation, we're talking about preventative plant health care. And so with these two photos, it's kind of the tale of two campuses. So these photos were last summer. I did a tour of Kansas, and I reached out to, so I can't remember if I reached out to K-State or if they reached out to me, but emerald ash borer is encroaching on Manhattan, Kansas. And so they wanted me to do a demonstration on tree injection for one of their ash trees. And I said, absolutely, I'll be happy to. We set it up, and I was expecting for, you know, like my typical demonstration, which is like a 20-inch ash tree or 15-inch ash tree, something like that. No. Come on, Emmett. We're going to take you to the big, not just, this is like the biggest tree on their campus. It's a 55-inch ash. They go on to tell me the story that this ash tree was here before K-State was even there. And it's the first time I've been to Kansas State, to their campus. And I had to say, it was just an absolutely gorgeous campus. They have a very good ag college there. And so as I was putting this presentation together, preventative plant health care, is like, well, that's why they had me out there. EAB was getting close. They want to do a preventative application. But you could tell they just took really good care of their trees on campus. And so not too far away in the state of Kansas, at KU, the Jayhawks, they had recently hired a new grounds supervisor, and he reached out to me. He used to work for a company that used our product, so he reached out to me, or maybe I reached out to him, can't remember, about treating trees on campus. And he showed me this one. It's a large pin oak near Allen Fieldhouse, which if you know anything about college basketball, you know what Allen Fieldhouse is. And you can see the condition that it's in. Basically, they did some renovation. They built a sidewalk on the side opposite from what we're looking at here. And so it's just kind of the tale of two universities here. K-State's calling me out to do this preventative application, wanting to care for this large tree on campus. KU did not perform preventative plant health care, and they built a sidewalk right next to this big tree, and you can see that it's in bad decline. It's yellow, which is chlorosis, dieback from the tips. All of that's resulting from the construction. It's just not in very good shape. So not meaning to poke fun at KU or anything like that, just kind of the situation that I came upon. But it really plays in nicely to something that you may or may not have seen. It's called Mannions disease spiral. And it's basically a way, this is how trees die, essentially. So you start off with a healthy tree, right? At one point in time, this tree in my picture was healthy. And even this one at Allen Fieldhouse was healthy, right? It's 45 inches now. So at some point in time, when it was younger, it was a nice, healthy tree. Well, then there's predisposing factors. So maybe the predisposing factor for my tree here is that it's in an unirrigated parkway. And so it's constantly dealing with some type of a chronic water deficit. So that kind of starts things off on this downward spiral for the tree. Then you get to an inciting factor. An inciting factor is like a triggering event. So maybe for this tree, it was the summer of 2011 in Texas, where we had basically 100 days of triple-digit temperatures in a row, and it didn't rain, right? So we had almost 4 months of triple digits. That's enough to put any tree into severe decline. So it could be drought, it could be construction, something like that is an inciting factor that it's like a triggering event, sends it down that downward spiral even faster. From there, the contributing factors is ultimately what's going to finish off the tree. So wood borers and your opportunistic pathogens like Hypoxylon canker, those are what ultimately finish off the tree. So by understanding this disease spiral, it can really help you in your efforts to keep trees healthy and to recover trees that maybe have been exposed to inciting factor. Because by knowing what's going to happen next, it can help you choose the right choices on how to treat and when to treat and what to treat for. Now, there are some exceptions to Mannions disease spiral. Sometimes, there's just these invasive pests and diseases, and there's nothing you can do about it preventatively. Say for like EAB, we can treat preventatively. Same with Dutch elm, oak wilt. You have to come in with some type of control measure to treat preventatively for all of these things. All right, so run through an example here of the disease spiral. Those of you who are my fellow Texans living in the North Texas area, or really probably anywhere through the state, or really anywhere in the South Central US, you probably know what's going on with this Leland cypress. So very common to see around here, these flagging symptoms on a Leland cypress tree. I've seen it numerous times. I know exactly what's going on there, but we're just going to play this out. If you were to poke your head inside that canopy, you would see these bleeding cankers on the stem of the tree, and that's called Cerium Canker. And so oftentimes I've gotten calls from people. They say, Emmett, I've got this Leland cypress. It's got Cerium Canker. It's dying from it. What do I do? What fungicide do I use to treat this canker disease? And so by understanding the disease spiral, we can better treat what is going on in this situation. So what you are seeing of Cerium Canker is actually the contributing factor. That is the opportunistic pathogen. So that means that this tree is already way down on our disease spiral, right? The contributing factor is already there trying to finish off that tree. The inciting factor for this tree was drought stress. Leland cypress love water, and Texas is not the most friendly environment for them to live in, especially during the summer months. And so on this particular site, the predisposing factor was shallow soil, not uncommon in Texas. So you've got this shallow soil, which kind of, these trees are also shallow rooted. And so kind of that chronic water deficit, maybe not too bad, but just underwatered. Then we get into the summer months, maybe the irrigation system breaks. That's the inciting factor, is the drought stress. And so what happens is these trees get drought stressed, they're weakened by that, and the opportunistic pathogen, Cerium Canker, gets on those trees, and you start to see this flagging, the bleeding cankers, and that's what finishes them off. And so what I chose to do here, this is actually at a golf course in the Denton, Texas area. Went out there. I don't think this tree was savable, but we treated some other ones with shortstop, our paclobutrazol product, because I was explaining those benefits earlier about increased root growth, increased chlorophyll. It actually helps them regulate water better through a change in the hormone production. And so it's a really good drought management product. And that's what I said, hey, these trees, as they get bigger, they're just going to need more and more water. And so hopefully we can get some growth inhibition using shortstop, but we're also going to get a lot of other benefits. And so we treated a handful of trees with shortstop, and the superintendent got back to me, said, man, the ones you treated look great. We're going to go ahead and treat all of them on the course and on the HOA with shortstop. Probably the biggest killer of trees in the DFW Metroplex is people. If I had to put my finger on it, people do some really stupid things when it comes to trees, and it all starts with where they're planted. We see it all the time: wrong species, wrong place, and the planting practices. My goodness, I come across trees all the time that have been planted too deep, wrong spot. They got mulch halfway up the trunk. Then you get to the irrigation. People are just watering for their turf. They pay no mind to the trees until they're dying. So there's just so many things that people do wrong when it comes to managing trees. Those are kind of your predisposing factors. And then you get to your inciting factors, which is like construction. And construction is really a big issue going on in the DFW area right now. I wished I would have written down the address of this photo. I took it probably 5 or 6 years ago, because I would almost guarantee you that that tree is not there anymore. The construction is really, really damaging to these larger mature trees. Soil disturbances as they fill and cut on new development areas. Over pruning can kill trees. Basically, you expose that trunk to sunlight that it's never gotten before because you cut so much wood out of it, and you get sun scald up and down the trunk, and ultimately that tree will die. And I've been seeing more and more with turf herbicides. There's a product called MSM that damages oak trees. I haven't seen a tree die from MSM, but it definitely slows them down. The proper planting, this is at the Dallas Cowboys practice facility in Frisco. Whoever installed these trees used this type of root anchoring system, and then they never came back and pulled it off the tree. And so as that elm grows, it's just going to get girdled by the rebar from that root anchoring system. This is another type of root anchoring system that I've seen that I think is really cool. Those are like dowel rods that are sharpened, kind of like a pencil. You hammer them through the root ball of the tree, and then that's a biodegradable plastic resin cap that slips over the top. It serves like the head on a nail to kind of anchor that root ball down. And then you just use a handsaw to trim off the excess dowel rod above that cap. And so that way everything is below ground, and it's all going to break down over time, and it's not going to kill the tree. There's the volcano mulch, the infamous volcano mulch. I'm not sure when, where, or how this trend got started, but it has caught on, and it's like people are asking for it now. That's how they think it's supposed to look. You really need to be able to see these root flares. The problem is that I give these talks, and it's usually to certified arborists, and so it's like I'm preaching to the choir. You all know it's not supposed to look like that. It's like, how do we change that messaging? How do we get landscapers that are doing this installation and doing this type of work to change and start doing it right? And I really don't know how to do that. What happens with that mulch? Mulch is really bad. The trunk needs to breathe. It has aerial tissue, and it interacts with the air. And when that mulch is piled up, it can't do that. And also it covers up these girdling roots. A lot of trees nowadays have girdling roots. That's a big problem. And if you don't address the girdling roots when the trees are small, they end up getting really large and cause some pretty bad damage. This kind of looks like it might be a Bradford pear. Oftentimes, like even in my own neighborhood, we'll have some strong winds come through during the thunderstorm season, and the Bradford pears will just be snapped off like a pencil in the ground because they have girdling roots, and it weakens that trunk, and they're not stable. It also chokes those trees, and over time, even without a storm, that tree will ultimately die just because it's getting strangled by the girdling root. So back to my construction example here. The predisposing factors for this tree, well, it was a tree in Dallas, Texas, down in the Park Cities, which is notorious for overwatering. So this tree before construction could have looked seemingly healthy, but more than likely it had like some sort of a low-grade Phytophthora infection because of the overwatering. And it's also probably about 80 years old. So it's just it's kind of getting older, maybe a lack of care. That's kind of the predisposing factor. That's all it took. Now the inciting factor. Bam, they build a McMansion on top of it. Not only that, but look at all the buckets that are underneath that tree. Like I can see, I don't know, 5 or 6. I can see a wheelbarrow, a few buckets. Who knows what they're mixing up? Lots of mortar and stuff for putting the stone on the side of the house. That causes damage too. You're changing up the soil. Look at that, doesn't even look like soil anymore. It just looks like dirt. And so all of this stuff goes on, and it's affecting the tree. That's a huge inciting factor for that tree. And so now I know the next thing that's going to happen is the opportunistic pathogens and insects. So wood borers and Hypoxylon canker are going to be the next things that get on this tree and ultimately kill it. So the construction does not kill the tree. it just sets it up where the insects and diseases can finish it off very easily. So our best management practices when it comes to preventative plant health care is really avoiding that predisposition and preventing the inciting factors. If that's not possible, then you are suppressing the contributing factors, insects and diseases, salvage what is left of the tree. And it's always, always, always important to set and manage the expectations of the tree owner. So talking about construction, pre-construction protection is extremely important. Unfortunately, especially in residential settings, usually an arborist is not brought on when somebody is building a house. It's the last thing on their mind until the tree starts to die. So usually on like a construction project, a new development, there are going to be measures in place for the contractors working on that development to protect the trees. And so they'll hire a consulting arborist or an arborist company to help with that. Fencing is super important. This orange fence, it may as well not even be there. They will literally lay that fence over, park their trucks on it. It doesn't really do much good. You can see a whole pile of it in the bottom left picture, or the bottom left corner of this picture. So if you can put up a chain link fence, something a bit more permanent, inside of that fenced in area, you want to have a good thick layer of wood chips or mulch, like 6 inches thick. That's really going to help prevent compaction if people are going to drive on that. And then also through the construction process, they're not going to be able to irrigate these trees. And so that's going to really help to maintain soil moisture. I'm doing all time here. And through the process, you're going to want to do things to help keep the trees healthy. And so pre-construction, paclobutrazol or shortstop is really a great product. Like if I was on this site, that would be the first thing I would do because of all the benefits that shortstop provides to these trees to help them be healthy. All right, back to this tree again. So I kind of put this in here as what would I do? Number one thing I would do, and I think it's important, if this is something that you're encountering frequently, construction injury to trees, I think it's important to kind of build out a step-by-step guide to how you're going to address this. I think that'd be really good for a company to have, especially if you have multiple arborists on staff, they're going to be dealing with the same things. Get everybody on the same page, including the plant healthcare staff. And so whenever you enter into this, everybody knows what's going on and why. And so number one, what I would do on this tree is a tree risk assessment. And I'm sure there's some guys on the call today that are track certified or qualified, I guess. More than likely, this tree would not even pass tree risk assessment. You built a house right on top of it. It looks like that house is maybe 2 feet from the trunk of the tree. So it basically, probably 2/3 of this tree's root system is totally wrecked. You've got a split lead. It's going over the house. There's too much risk there. So I would say this tree would not get past tree risk assessment. Time to cut it down. But if it does get past it, what are we going to do? The second thing is to set and manage expectations. Hey, Mr. Homeowner, you built a tree on top of, or you built a house on top of your tree. It's going to be in bad shape. It's probably going to take several years for it to get back to some sort of health. Or, maybe you don't get called out to this tree until like 3 or 4 years post-construction. By that time, this tree is probably in really bad shape. If that's the case, you got to know when to walk away. Say, hey, look, this tree is on its last leg. It's almost dead. It's time to cut your losses. Set those expectations. You can tell somebody that, and they'll still turn around and say, I don't care. I want to do everything I can to save it. And if that's the case, you need to have them sign like a waiver of liability or and they just set their expectations of this tree is almost dead. I want you to know that I don't think treatments are going to work. It's kind of like, stage 4 cancer or something like that. But if you want to engage in a treatment plan, the first actual control measure that I would take, going back to my disease spiral, I know that this tree, where it's at on that spiral, it's already past the inciting factor. So the next thing that's going to happen is the opportunistic pests and diseases, hypoxylin, canker, and wood borers. So what I would do is I would inject the tree with Triage or imamectin benzoate, because I know that it lasts for 2 years, controlling basically all types of wood borers. And then I'd piggyback that with Phosphojet, which is our potassium phosphite product, which helps boost the tree's own defense system. And it also alleviates Phytophthora root rot, which I believe a lot of trees in the urban environment, especially in Dallas, Texas, have some sort of a Phytophthora infection just based off of the over-irrigation that occurs here. And so you're getting a lot of good from that first treatment. And the reason I'm doing Phosphojet in this manner is just as a piggyback. If I've already gone through the trouble of drilling and injecting Triage into the tree, I want to go ahead and add Phosphojet just to utilize those injection sites again. It's called a piggyback application. The next step is I would loosen the soil, if possible, come in there with the air knife to aerate the soil. A lot of times that's going to be a hard sell because this person just built this house. They probably have some sort of big, beautiful landscape underneath the tree, but that's really a great service to offer in this situation. Help to loosen up the soil, loosen up that compaction, get some oxygen into the ground. Getting oxygen to the root system is super important because roots need that airspace in order to grow. Then I'm going to encourage roots in the soil microbiology. And the way I'm going to do this is through adding carbon sources, like we touched on earlier, compost, molasses, humic acid, biochar. Those are all great things to incorporate into these soils to help the root system as well as the soil structure and the soil microbiology. I might consider adding some nutrition. When trees get really sick like this from construction or other factors, I don't think putting a ton of NPK on them is really the way to go. Because like I said earlier, nitrogen encourages growth. And if a tree is declining, you're going to stimulate, it's kind of like false growth. It's going to stimulate it to grow, but it can't support that growth because it doesn't have the health. So just be careful with that. Maybe some low grade nutrients, but nothing that's real heavy, especially on the quick release nitrogen. You don't want a ton of that going on these trees. I put paclobutrazol on here too, with an asterisk, because if these trees, paclobutrazol is not a 911 product. If the tree is in really severe decline, paclobutrazol is not going to save it. You'd want that tree to kind of come out of that decline and start to put on some growth and start to show some signs of health before you use the growth regulator to your benefit. And so I put an asterisk on there. Like basically, if I got on this tree the first year after construction, I would use it. If I was out there 4 years after construction, it was dying way back, then I wouldn't use that right away. I'd be doing other things. Then you're going to monitor for health and new growth. That was part of our IPM strategy, monitoring. And so we're going to keep an eye on this tree. We're going to watch for new growth on the tips. We're going to watch for new growth on the pruning wounds. Like you can see some right above the dumpster, halfway up on the house. You can see those old pruning cuts. We want to look at that callus tissue, see if it's putting on new wood. And that is how you know you're getting it on the right track. So monitor for health and new growth, and then continue those treatments until healthy. So really something like this, how I would propose it to this homeowner is all of this would be kind of bundled up as a construction package. And I would present it as, here is our construction package. I wouldn't have this line itemed out like a price tag next to each thing that I'm doing. It's going to be a bundle. Maybe I'd bill them quarterly, let them know that I'm going to be out there quarterly doing things to help recover their tree. And we're going to need to continue doing this quarterly service for the next couple of years until we get this tree around the corner. Make them understand that construction is it's like the worst thing you can do to a tree is submit it to this, and that we have to do a lot of different applications and a lot of different monitoring to make sure that this tree can regrow its roots, we can get the soil healthy, and then ultimately get the tree healthy. Fortunately for me, I'm getting to practice a little bit of what I'm preaching here. So last year, pre-COVID, so like January, February, the Tulsa Zoo reached out to me, the horticulture department did, and they built a playground on top of these humongous trees. So there's some water oaks and red oaks in here, and they're like 40 to 50 inches in diameter, just big trees. You guys see the construction fencing around these trees? That's because there was none. Zero type of protection at all. Just major compaction, major root loss on these big, big trees. And so I put together a plan for them. In January, apply shortstop to all the trees near the site. They did that. March and April, they were going to hire a contractor to do some soil amending with compost, but COVID hit and the zoo was closed. Then I recommended, just like my disease spiral example, trunk inject with triage and phosphojet, because I knew they did that construction, and the next thing that was going to happen was the borers and the cankers. June, soil drench or root feed with hydrotane and Cytogrow. June, July, August, September, thorough irrigation 1 time per week. I knew that drought would be the issue through the summer, so we want to monitor that soil moisture. Hydrotane, that's a product that we manufacture through our Ecologel company that actually extends the availability of moisture in the soil. So through the summer months, I didn't want those trees to get dehydrated. Those are large, large trees, like I was saying, 40 to 50 inches in diameter. They require a lot of moisture. Plus, their root system had been damaged, and so they weren't able to get all that moisture because they didn't have the roots that they needed. November, bark spray with phosphite and pintrabark. So phosphites, that's what's in our phosphojet product. There are some other products out there that can be used as a bark spray, and that's what I was recommending to them because I didn't want them drilling that tree twice in the same year. And then I was going to have them do a soil drench or root feeding with BioMP, which is molasses, Enviroplex is humic acid, and Cytogrow is seaweed extract. So all of these things to improve the soil microbiology by adding carbon sources and encouraging root development with Cytogrow, the seaweed extract. I sent this out. I actually think I put together 4 years of treatment for these trees, and I really need to follow up with them because it is now the end of March and see if they're able to do these other applications. So back to that bark spray with the phosphite, also the root feeding with our carbon-based products. Same thing this summer, we're basically doing moisture management with hydrotane and Cytogrow. Keep an eye on the watering, make sure they're staying hydrated. November, back to that bark spray. What I found with the potassium phosphite fungicide is keeping a constant level of that active ingredient in the tree is really what brings it around and can help it recover. It's not a one and done application. It's something I found doing it 2 times a year can be very, very effective. And then the same thing with the root feeding. That's something you'd like to do 2 times a year to keep those carbon sources replenished in the soil and just continue to stimulate root development. So I took these photos last summer whenever I began traveling again. Those trees are still there. The playground's completely finished. They do have a lot of mulch under the trees now. I'm afraid that's a little too little too late, but No major decline yet. Usually with construction, it's going to take several years for that to catch up to the trees because they do have a massive amount of carbohydrates stored in their root system. And so they lost their funding. They weren't able to inject the trees like I wanted them to. I think that one on the left, that was the largest tree. I went ahead and treated it for them at no cost with the Triage and Phosphojet. So because these trees are so massive and they're growing, or there's a playground underneath them now, there's zero tolerance for any type of risk on these trees. Dead limbs, Ganoderma conchs, anything like that basically means that tree has to come out. The access to these trees, they would have been better off removing them ahead of time, but they chose this location because of the trees. Little did they know they were going to kill them. You know, now to get these out, they're gonna have to get a crane in there somehow. The access is limited. It's going to be a very, very expensive removal job. So hopefully I can continue to work with the zoo to preserve these trees. So the products that I was recommending through that are part of our ArborRx program. Hopefully you've taken a look at this. I've sent out some emails and talked to a lot of folks about this already, but it's our line of soil applied products. And it falls in line with kind of ArborJet's philosophy of being environmentally responsible. We want to use products, you know, a lot of this is carbon-based, even the Arborplex fertilizer that we have, the micronutrients are chelated with humic acid. And so we even have carbon sources in that. And that's what we want to do, is encourage that soil to be healthy. So if you haven't taken a look at our ArborRx products, I encourage you to check that out online or reach out to your RTM. And with that, we're going to skip this stuff and jump to questions. We'll go to summary. First, tree decline is often triggered by an abiotic stress. Okay, so that's our inciting factor. The drought stress, construction, those are the two things that I really touched on today. I'm sure we can think of some other ones though. Early identification and correction of those abiotic factors, you can reverse the decline, but early is the key word here. Not every tree is sableable. You've got to know when to walk away. If there is something about a tree that's making you uncomfortable, walk away from it. You know, it's not worth it. Again, I should have added to that definition of IPM, the risk to your business is also very important to consider. IPM is involving a lot more than just pesticides. There's a lot of tools in your toolbox that you can use as part of that IPM program. And something that's huge, I learned this early on in my career, and I try to tell everybody about it. Setting and managing expectations is really, really important. If you can get somebody on the same page as you on the recovery of their tree, your life is going to be so much easier. But if we start treating like my construction tree, if we don't set their expectations low, you know, they may expect that tree to bounce back the next year. And then when it looks about the same, they're going to fire you. Oh, you didn't do a good job. The tree still looks sick to me. But if you tell them ahead of time, hey, look, this construction is really debilitating to your tree. I have a treatment plan. I deal with this all the time. I want to start doing this, but you need to know your tree is going to look about the same next year. We basically have to stop the bleeding before we can get it to start improving. And with that, create your plan and follow through. I think that's huge for any company, especially if you have multiple salespeople out there or sales arborists. Get them all doing the same thing. I think you're greatly going to see an increase in how many trees you are saving. Oftentimes, these different arborists, you know, they're all trying to do good things, but they go about it differently. And so one sales guy is selling a plant healthcare plan one way, somebody within the same company is selling it a different way, and the plant healthcare technician doesn't know what's going on. And with that, we will do questions.